Good morning, Cincinnati. It's a beautiful day here. I want to start today, as I did yesterday, recognizing that the biggest moral issue, there are other issues that are very important, but the biggest moral issue right now is what happened to George Floyd, murdered. The man who murdered him was charged with murder. And it raises a whole host of issues that we as a city have been through before, and we're not perfect, and we will continue to be part of those conversations and hope to be part of those solutions. And I don't want everything else that is dominating the news around the country this morning to take away from that point. And so I start with that again, because I do think that it's important to keep the moral North Star, that we need to build a more inclusive country and city. The second thing, though, I want to talk about, because we wake up to images of Nashville City Hall burning, 5 police cars burning in Cleveland, unbelievable outbreaks in cities across the country of horrible images that put officers and citizens' lives at risk. I think somebody was killed in Indianapolis. Scary times, sad times. But in Cincinnati last night, the Cincinnati Police Department proved that they are the best in the nation, the envy of the state. And the city manager and I had the privilege of riding with the police from about he was there longer, but I was with him from about 6:45 p.m. until midnight. And we were at a safe, well, I don't know if it's safe, but at some distance, able to witness most of the major interactions last evening, including District 1 between the hours of 8 and 9 p.m., including a number of arrests at Liberty and Vine, including the break-off group that went up to the Cuff, Coreyville area. And I got to tell you, on a personal note, I was scared. I mean, it was scary. And I think it's really important to understand just how frightening these situations can be. And our officers showed incredible restraint, incredible professionalism. And let's not forget that while it's true that we facilitate and support everyone's First Amendment right of protest, it's not like they're saying nice things about the police in these protests. In fact, they're saying very angry things about these officers. And, you know, our officers are human beings too. And yet, they showed the professionalism and restraint that I think is the role model for the nation. And I do want to share an anecdote based on my observation, and my observation was it was also informed by a police radio that we had access to, and information that I was able to get that the average person wouldn't have. But nonetheless, it is true. We were at District 1 from 8 to 9, like I said, at a distance, so people couldn't see us, but we could see them. And I just want to tell the story. And because race is such a big issue in all of this, and the treatment of African Americans by law enforcement is the right North Star of improvement that we need, I will state that I think it's relevant to point out that the activities that we found the most frightening and the most scary as we sat there were by white people. And there were a number of white people in the crowd that were clearly engaged in coordinated activities. And I personally saw individuals separate from the protest, walk around District 1, look like they were casing District 1, getting up with a notepad and writing down how many officers there were in certain locations. Other individuals pointing to windows that ultimately later a rock was thrown through. And at the same time that this is happening, we are seeing on Twitter and social media images of cop cars on fire in Cleveland. And we're seeing the images from the night before of the Portland Justice Center burning. And we are seeing images, like I mentioned, from Nashville of the City Hall burning. Again, we're only human. We couldn't help but ask ourselves: Are they gonna try to? Is there gonna be a bomb? Are they gonna throw incendiaries at us or at the cops? Ultimately, there was a white man who took a rag and, in clear view of the officers, knowing he was being watched. So clearly he was trying to provoke. He doused it with some liquid. At the same time that he and others were pointing to a window that ultimately had a rock thrown through it. Clearly trying to provoke the officers into overreacting and potentially shooting into the crowd, which would have killed God knows how many innocent people who were, in fact, exercising their First Amendment right to protest. So I think we got to be real about what's happening and distinguishing, as I said yesterday, those who have many reasons to be upset about the state of the criminal justice system and, in particular, law enforcement's relationship with the black community, and other folks who clearly have another agenda to attempt to get innocent people hurt. I will also just point out, and the chief is going to talk here in a minute about some of the details of last night, but in the number of arrests for curfew, et cetera. But at another point in the evening, we were at Liberty and Vine, where a number of arrests were made for a curfew violation. And I will point out again that, at least from the moment I was there and watching it, I believe every person arrested was white. And so I just think these kinds of facts have got to get out there, that this is a complicated situation and there's a difference between peaceful protest and righteous indignation and the kinds of things that led to the looting on Friday night and other criminal behavior and potential threats and real threats to our police officers. And for all those reasons, and because our officers did such a tremendous job last night, and you're not waking up to images like you've seen around the country in Cincinnati, and we hope and pray that that continues. And sometimes luck is involved, and I'm not saying we can't end up in those other locations, but that's one of the reasons why I want to identify, that I believe the curfew was an extremely helpful tool last night in preventing a repeat of what happened on Friday, but also to announce today that I am extending it citywide tonight and tomorrow night, so Sunday night and Monday night, and moving up the time from 10 p.m. to 9 p.m. As I said yesterday, we reserve the right to expand or contract the curfew as appropriate as things go on. We hope that we don't need to extend it beyond Tuesday morning, but for the reasons that we saw such a professional, sensitive, and good outcome relative to what we saw around the country, I think it is one of the tools that helped us get there. And so that's what happened last night from my personal point of view and from what I personally witnessed. I'd like to ask the chief to come up and give a report on last night, today. There's more obviously activities planned today and tomorrow, and so just talking about all that, and then of course we'll take questions. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to begin, as I did yesterday, by again reminding everyone that we all condemn the actions of what took place in Minneapolis. That is not the way professional law enforcement should conduct themselves. We support the prosecution of the officers involved in that, and we support professional and good policing. Regarding the activities of Saturday, the demonstrations began in Washington Park around noon. An extremely large crowd of over 1,000 people. I attended a good portion of it myself. Very peaceful, people expressing their First Amendment right. We stood in support of that. Throughout the afternoon, approximately half, or in the neighborhood of 500 people, began to march throughout the Over the Rhine area, I believe, over here to City Hall, still remaining peaceful, people expressing their First Amendment right. We did, about 5 p.m., have 2 arrests of, I believe, two young ladies involved with a confrontation with our officer, where one spit on our officer, the other took hold of one of our mountain bike officers' bicycle and refused to release it. The marches continued throughout the early evening. Still not much of a problem until, as the mayor touched on, about 8:30 p.m., the crowd gathered in front of District 1. I was there as well, witnessing the events that took place. The mayor hit the major points. Additional to what he indicated, I saw some individuals attempting to pry open the windows of the district with what appeared to be the intent to place something inside. Several bottles were thrown. I gave the order to deploy one of our pepper blast canisters to disperse the crowd. Additional rocks and bottles were thrown. And as the crowd moved throughout the Over the Rhine neighborhood, we continue to have several encounters throughout the evening where we were forced to deploy OC gas as well. Continue to have our officers pelted with rocks and bottles. This behavior continued as a good portion of the crowd later in the evening decided to move into the Quarryville, Cuff neighborhoods. Several more encounters occurred. Just before 1 a.m., as our officers were in a line formation on East McMillan at Ohio, officers were receiving rocks and bottles thrown again, and during that time, a shot was fired, hitting one of our officers. The round went through the officer's shield, riot shield, and struck his helmet. We brought those items here to show, and we'll give you a close-up view at the end of the presentation. The officer did not sustain any injuries. However, to be a part of such a traumatic event, I have placed him on administrative leave for him to deal with that incident. This behavior continued until the early hours of the morning. Regarding arrest information, The latest report that I've received, we've arrested 110 people for various offenses, the largest being misconduct at an emergency, which is what the curfew violation is. We arrested 78 individuals for misconduct at an emergency. We can provide more details a little bit later today as our people compile this, but various other charges, 4 charges of arson, disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, an assault on a police officer, carrying a concealed weapon. We did charge 1 individual with rioting, and then also 1 individual with vandalism. An individual threw a brick through the windshield of one of our police cars. We also sustained damage to the district. As the mayor mentioned, one of the windows was broken out. Throughout the evening, we also saw numerous businesses, particularly along Calhoun Street, sustain quite a bit of damage, windows broken. Also, it appeared that a number of shots had been fired into a number of the businesses as well. Continuing through today, there is a demonstration plan for 3 o'clock that we're aware of, taking place in, I believe, in Inwood Park, because it was originally supposed to be downtown, but in Inwood Park. I'm not certain what else is planned for the evening, but we will continue our same deployment as we did for Saturday night through tonight. There have been a number of other things that have been presented. I know one that has gone viral on social media, that we fired a shot or a beanbag round striking a 12-year-old in the West End. Simply did not occur. I don't believe we even had any encounters in the West End last night. Simply did not occur. I know there are a number of other things that are out there. Our officers have done a tremendous job of trying to maintain the peace and safety of our city. We will continue that same posture throughout the evening and until this period is over. Are we ready to entertain any questions, Mayor? We'll open it up for questions at this point. Yes.
This question is for the mayor. What assistance will there be for the businesses in the Clifton area that were damaged last night?
The question is about providing assistance to the businesses that have been looted. We are open to that, and we're going to look at what our options are. Obviously, insurance claims will help too, but regardless, we're open-minded about that. I don't have an answer right now. The most important thing is to give the officers the tool like the curfew, extend it. Obviously, people did go up to the Coreyville Cuff area last night, so that's why we're extending it jurisdictionally for now, is to make sure that we get through the next couple days with as little of those incidences as possible. Yeah.
I also want to add that this morning around 5 a.m., 6 a.m., our Department of Public Services went out to the Cuff Clifton area to kind of help the businesses clean up some of the shattered glass and some of the trash and debris that was emptied out from their storefronts, to kind of help them get that stuff taken away and cleaned up from the street as well.
Yeah, Public Services both yesterday and today. Yesterday they helped with downtown over the Rhine, and today up in the Coreyville area. Next question.
Mayor Cranley.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Chief, can you detail a little bit more about the 1 a.m. incident involving the officer shot, as in your words? Was it ricochet? Was the shot directed specifically toward the officer? Any sort of ballistics information you can give us? And is that the one assault on an officer arrest that you've made, or is that individual still?
No, that's another incident We have not made an arrest on this. The investigation is being conducted the way that we handle any incident of this type, handled by our criminal investigation section. I absolutely believe it was intentional. The round, as you can see, went through the shield and struck the center of the helmet. So our officers stand at a position with the shield in front of him, very clearly a shot. When this occurred, our officers were in a line formation. This was during a period of time where there was a confrontation at McMillan and Ohio. Our officers attempting to disperse the crowd, and when I had a conversation with the officer, he originally thought it was a rock that had hit him until he realized what had happened. The investigation is continuing. We are starting to develop some information, and yes, I fully believe it was intentional.
Does this kind of reflect an escalation or an aggression, or people being emboldened now to do more? And again, I know you can't put yourself in someone else's perspective, but again, is that what we're seeing? You also mentioned there is an assault on an officer. Can you detail that as well? Is that something else?
Someone we caught that had actually thrown something at the officer. We had a number of officers that were struck with rocks and bottles, but very minor. And as far as an escalation, this conduct we're seeing across the country. There are these individuals that have decided that they will attempt to take the life of an officer. And I believe that's what this was.
I just have a question for the mayor. Could you clarify, you distinguished a little bit between the protesters and then you said the people who have a different agenda. Who are these other people, or would you call them rioters? Are they people from out of state?
Well, I don't know the answer as to where they're from, but by their appearance, but a lot of them have backpacks. And I don't know why, if you lived in this city, you would need a backpack if you were intending to go home or you weren't traveling a long distance, but that's speculation. What I do know is that there was eyewitness people who were pointing at windows. A rock was ultimately thrown through a window at District 1, having something that looked like it could be an incendiary device, throwing it at the building, setting off firecrackers at the same time, which, is clearly meant to try to get an overreaction from our police department. A whole bunch of other rocks and bottles thrown at our officers. And yet, incredible professionalism and restraint shown by our police officers in reaction to clear attempts to provoke. And that doesn't even include the fact that we had an officer shot, luckily with no injuries, physically no injuries. Emotionally, that's a different story. And that was after I had mentioned I left at midnight. So that happened at about 1 a.m. or whatever. So these are really scary situations.
So would you say that the protesters are necessarily responsible for some of the damage or the escalation that we're seeing or the violence, or would you say it's a different group of people that we're talking about?
As I said yesterday, the people who looted on Friday night, and there's plenty of video of that, I believe if you go back and watch the protest during the day, that you will not see any of those individuals in the protest. Last night, we didn't have the same level of looting, at least in downtown Over the Rhine, although the stores were broken in Clifton and Corryville, or Corryville and Cuff area. The people that I witnessed that were provoking at District 1, they were clearly coordinating with each other around the crowd, and they weren't really chanting. They were clearly up to efforts that would provoke. And just think about how evil that is, of pretending to throw, whether it was real or not real, who knows, it may have been real, but something that looks like an incendiary and dropping fireworks at the same time. I mean, imagine if that had led to the officers firing into the crowd and the number of innocent people who were in fact protesting and chanting their concerns about police, et cetera, which they have a right to do, if they had been shot as a result of a clear attempt to provoke an overreaction from the police. Sherry?
Can you talk about the decision to make the curfew citywide and what went into that and not just in areas where we have seen things the last 2 nights?
Well, this was made at the request and in consultation with the chief, who is obviously doing a tremendous job leading our police department. And we obviously had a splinter group go up to Coreyville and Cuff last night. And in light of what's happening around the country, I just think it's probably smarter to be prepared for, change of locale. I mean, the fact, I didn't even know this until just now, that Sawyer Point moved to Inwood, that alone would suggest that the geography may not stay in downtown and over the Rhine. Yeah, back there. No, let me get over again, yeah.
I guess this is for Chief Elliott Isaac. So now that it is citywide as opposed to, I believe, was it just like OTR in downtown? If there are protesters out past 9 o'clock, will they immediately be arrested even if they're not violent?
No, we've given everyone warnings. Even last night, I've heard that we were not warning people. We've even gone around and via our PA systems, directing people that the curfew is in effect and they need to disperse. Everyone that was arrested last night was warned that the curfew was in effect. These are individuals that refuse to leave the area. As far as citywide, obviously it's a challenge to enforce the entire city. The areas that we are having problems will obviously be our priority, absolutely.
So Chief, can you elaborate, what does a citywide curfew, what should it look like ideally starting at 9 p.m.?
9 p.m., everyone,
All citizens need to be.
only those that have essential reasons to be out. There are individuals that work in the evening. We have our medical personnel. There are essential places that we need, that people are going to be out. We understand that. We're not trying to interfere with the things that have to take place. These are individuals that are out for nefarious purposes.
So again, sir, and again, I hate to sound naive, but in all 52 neighborhoods of the city of Cincinnati, again, we're not talking about arresting people walking off of their front lawn or anything of that nature, but obviously individuals who are engaging in some sort of activity, or if you can, just.
Again, as you mentioned, 52 neighborhoods. This is a city of over 300,000 people. It will be very difficult for us to enforce this citywide. We will give priority to where we have problems.
Yeah, I just think we got to use common sense. Everyone who is out after 9 o'clock tonight and tomorrow night is at risk of violating the curfew, which is a criminal offense. As the chief said, even last night, with people that had far more sinister attempts to provoke the police, rather than someone who might just be, not realizing that they went to the store or at a restaurant past 9 o'clock, 9:01 or something, is different, and common sense prevails. And in that scenario, if for whatever reason, the officer has the free time, because they're obviously so busy right now, that they would interact with someone coming out of a restaurant at 9:01, of course there's going to be a warning. Hey, it's time to go. Just like we gave warnings to people with far more provocatory, that's not even sure if that's a word, but I made it up, I guess, but intentions. But because we saw the change in geography last night, and because we know that protests are planned in different parts of the city, I think it's just wise to give ourselves those tools. And I do think it's important to recognize that it's a Sunday night and a Monday night, which is different than a Saturday night. We didn't really want to hurt business. I mean, businesses have been hurting for months, So last night, we didn't want to hurt businesses that weren't going to be anywhere near the center of concern. And it worked, for the most part, it worked out. But except for Coreyville, obviously, and Cuff. So, we're trying to balance a number of interests, including the understandable interest of businesses to stay open and be open after months of shutdown, as they try to put their livelihoods, back together.
Mayor,
Yeah.
we saw yesterday that a lot of the groups after the 10 PM curfew downtown moved over to Clifton. So now that you've made it citywide, is there any concern for those groups moving over to Covington or Newport? Covington or Newport, or over the border and?
I mean,
It does happen?
I mean, I know that Governor Bashir and the leadership in Northern Kentucky are focused on all this as well, and they should. Sherry?
Was there any thought to bringing the National Guard in as we saw in Cleveland and Columbus?
Well, we're not going to rule anything out, but we don't believe it's appropriate at this time. We have the best police department in the country, and I think last night proved that we have the manpower to deal with it. If the chief comes to me and says, "Hey, we're stretched too thin," or if we go through 3-4 days in a row where people are on 12-hour shifts, et cetera, and we're obviously at some point exhaustion would set in. We'll keep our options open. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there were some State Highway Patrol folks who worked under our command last night. But fundamentally, this is an urban issue, and urban police departments have way more experience and sensitivity, in my opinion. And we've been doing this for a very long time. So we're not ruling anything out, but we don't see it in the short term. Oh, I'm sorry. We do have folks who called in. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. WVXU, question?
I'm okay at the moment, thank you.
She's okay.
Mayor,
Yeah.
Cameron Knight with the Inquirer here. Is there, this is probably for the chief, have you been able to tally up if any of the arrests were people local or from far away or anything like that? Do you have any stats on that yet?
Not yet. I do. Our folks are working on those details. I know there will be also questions regarding the demographics of the arrested, so we'll be able to provide that a little bit later.
Is there a question from WVXU?
She said no. She said no.
Oh, okay. Anybody else on the over speaker on the, not here physically? Okay. Any other
One
questions
more,
in here?
Chief,
Oh, wait.
One more, Chief. You mentioned 110 arrests. Was that just Saturday Saturday into Sunday, or did that also include Friday?
No, that was just from Saturday and until this morning.
Thank you.
Last question.
I just have a question for the chief.
Okay.
So we were talking to a couple of the organizers that were part of the protests yesterday, and they sort of kind of listed out a list of demands, if you will, of what they're looking for in terms of change or reform. I'm curious if you have thought of that in your own department, of things that you guys would do differently. Of course, you guys have already made some changes in the past, whether it's adding diversity training or cultural training. But just from what you've seen around the country and what you're seeing in Cincinnati now, have you talked to your team or even thought about what you guys would do moving forward in terms of reform?
We've done a tremendous amount of reform. We're very proud of the work that's been done. We are still, prior to the pandemic, in the process of a collaborative refresh. I'm always mindful of what reform we can engage our officers in and what are the best practices that develop throughout the profession. I've had an opportunity to talk to a lot of people as well that have shared their thoughts. I've talked to a lot of the protesters. I'm always open to hear other thoughts. So certainly, definitely that conversation and that engagement needs to take place. I think that our police department has come a long way. And there's more work to be done, and I think we recognize that. There's more work to be done in the profession. There's more work to be done throughout the criminal justice system. And I think that some departments, some parts of the criminal justice system have made reforms faster than others. I think there's some others that need to catch up.
Yeah, and I would point out that we have an explicit ban on chokehold, right, which is similar to what happened to George Floyd in Minneapolis. And I think it was in the New York Times I read that Minneapolis Police Department had an explicit policy that allowed and authorized force on neck in non-life-threatening situations, meaning obviously our officers could do something like that if they believed they were about to be killed. But other than that, it's a ban on chokeholds. And that resulted from the collaborative agreement and the process of continuous reform in this city. And of course, there's more to do. But as the chief said, I'm very proud of the distance we've traveled. And I think that distance showed last night, and the ability to deal with very tense situations very professionally. Sherry?
I have one more question. Were paramedics called to help anyone, officers or any of the protesters?
I don't have the exact numbers, but I did hear throughout the evening that medical fire personnel were called a couple of times. I believe there was one person that we arrested that had minor injuries. Nothing that they were taken. I believe they were treated on the scene prior to be taken to the Justice Center.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.